Once again, good evening. My name is Karen Peters, and I'm president of the Wilmington Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Once again, you are welcome to go to the bar, get some drinks or food, whatever, even in the middle of the presentation, should you desire to do so. And again, please see Gil for the gift card basket raffle tickets. $5 for each and $20 for 5. And those help to benefit the Wilmington Historical Society. The drawing for that is on September 12th during the Festival of Colors. Again, also, please remember to sign in if you have not done so already. New York State likes to know that we have real people coming to our events, so we would really like to have you sign in. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. I would just say a couple of things about them. The authors of the First Adirondackers are Dave Fadden and Curt Steger. They challenge the widespread, long-standing belief that the Adirondack Uplands of northern New York were uninhabited before the arrival of the European colonizers. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Through local indigenous traditions and supporting findings by natural science, authors Dave Fadden and Curt Steger expose, document, and honor the long human presence in the Adirondacks, helping not only to redefine what it means to be an Adirondacker, but also contributing to a more complete understanding of America itself. So without further ado, which one of you is first? This is Dave.
Hello, my name is Dave Fadden. My Kanietakeron or Mohawk name is Kanietakeron. Kanietakeron is a Mohawk name translated in English loosely means patches of snow. So I was born March 15th. Beware the Ides of March. And I often wondered why I got that name, because I was born in Lake Placid and I was raised in Archeological, which is just over that hill over there. And the name Patches of Snow, I often wondered why I got that, because here, mid-March, still have about 10 foot of snow. But it wasn't until I moved to the Mohawk territory, a place called Akwesasne, and that's right along the Canadian border, right along the shores of the St. Lawrence River. When I moved there, my first birthday in the spring, there was patches of snow on the ground. And it made sense because my great-grandmother was still alive when I was born. And it's usually the eldest female on your mother's side that names the babies, and that's where she lived. And so when I was born on that day, there was patches of snow, or Kanietakeron, and that's my name. I belong to the Wolf Clan, the Mohawk Nation. And I want to start off how we started this book. And in Mohawk, we say, Ohando Galiwadekpa. And what that means is the words that we say before we begin, or the words before all else, also known as the Thanksgiving address. These words are spoken at gatherings, like a gathering today. In our community and all Iroquoian communities, whenever they begin an event, whether it be spiritual, political, even a meeting, any kind of gathering, you always start with these words. And it's basically, in a nutshell, is giving thanks to all the things that we see, all the things that we feel, all the things that keep us alive. And you start from the smallest, work your way up to the top. And I'll give you a really short version of this, just to put our minds in one place. So first of all, we greet each other and we acknowledge each other as human beings in our lives, in our existence in this place. And some of us today may have traveled some distance to get here, while others may have just traveled around the corner. But we all look healthy, we all look happy, and we're here to share and hopefully develop friendships. So we greet each other as people first, and we give thanks to our existence. And then we turn our attention to our mother. And our mother is what we call this earth. We call it Mother Earth. And like all moms, not only human moms, the animals, the birds, they're the ones that take care of the little ones, the babies, and they're the future. And so we greet our mother, the earth, and send thanks and greetings and acknowledge her existence. And from the earth, we move to the plant life that we see so beautifully here. You look all around, all the different plants. And some of the plants you can harvest for food, you can eat, whereas other plants you can harvest for medicine when we're sick. And there are other plants that we can see in the beauty of the flower. This makes us feel so good. So we send our greetings and we acknowledge all the plant life in the world. And we send thank you. And from the plants, we look into the ground and the roots that draw the nutrients from the earth to those plants and everything else. And some of those roots are also food and medicine. And so we acknowledge the roots of the plants and we give greetings and thanks. Then we move to the water, the streams, the brook, the lakes, the ponds, the rivers. All of that water that we see is what keeps us alive. Without water, we wouldn't exist very long, maybe a few days at most. And that water quenches our thirst, cleans our body. And sometimes people complain about the rain. I don't, because I've seen it here when there's no water, and it's very scary. So we send our greetings as one mind and one voice to all the water of the world and give thanks. And from them, we move up to the trees, all the trees that we see that shade us during those hot summer days, the trees that we burn in the winter that keeps us warm, the wood that we see that covers our heads, that creates shelter, the maple that produces sugar in the spring. So we look to the trees of the world and we gather our minds together, and with one voice, we offer greetings and thank you to the trees of the world. And from the trees, we look into the forests, and sometimes we see them. Saw them on my way over here. The animals. We have the deer, the moose, the bear, the coyote, the fox, the wolf, the muskrat, the woodchuck, all those beautiful animals around us, and to provide food in some cases and clothing as well. We refer to them as our cousins. And so with one mind, we collect our thoughts together and we offer greeting and thanks to the animals of the world. And from the animals, we move even higher. When we look to the trees and who lives in those trees. In Mohawk, we say, Uchitana, that's the birds. And they say when we hear their songs, that makes the sun in our hearts shine. It elevates us. They bring beauty to the world. And we have legends and stories about the birds and how they got their songs. It's from an upper world. Some of them are so beautiful. But when you hear it, it elevates us. And so we gather our minds together as one, and we offer thanks to the birds of the Ojibwe. And from the Ojibwe, we move even higher. And you see those trees move from that wind. We call to the four directions, the north, south, east, and west. From the north, they say is the bear, the wind that brings the cold. We're just starting to feel that cold coming in. And from the south, in the spring, it's the fawn. The warmth starts to come back. And from the east, call it the moose, and that brings the fog, the dampness. And from the west, it's the mountain lion that runs fast, and it's like a storm that comes through over the mountains. Those winds work together and they help replenish the air we breathe. And without the wind, everything would be stagnant and wouldn't move. And so collectively, we gather our minds together as one, and we send greetings and thanks to the wind. And from the wind brings latiweras, And Latiwelas, in English, it means the thunder beings, the thunders, those storm clouds that come. You hear them rumbling. We refer to them as our grandfathers. Without Latiwelas, if you don't hear them anymore, something's wrong. And they bring with them the rain that replenishes those streams out there. And so in the spring, the first time you hear the Latiwelas rumbling, you offer tobacco as a thanksgiving that we know they're coming back. So with one mind, we gather our thoughts and we send greetings to the Latiwelas. And from the Latiwelas, we move even higher. And we can see him right there is our elder brother, the sun. The sun brings warmth and heat. And without the sun, it would be so dark. And we call it the elder brother. It's a male force. And they say the elder brother, the sun, loves sports and lacrosse and things like that. And even more, that's a part of the human experience. It's that violent of a male. But we offer greetings and thanks to the elder brother, the sun. Then in the nighttime, we see our grandmother, the moon. And our grandmother, she looks after all females. Babies are born according to her. And she watches over all female life. And so we collectively send thanks and we greet the grandmother moon. Then we look to the stars and they guide us at night and they remind us of stories of past. They have legends. And they say in the morning, go out into your lawn and the grass is decked with all that dew. That's from the stars. And so we gather our thoughts and our minds as one. Send greetings and thanks to the stars. Then I close with this. I went through this very fast. If I left anything out, that wasn't my intention. And it's at this time we send greetings and thanks to those things that I may have forgotten. That is a short version of Adirondacks. Now, when I was a little kid, we go to ceremonies and other events. There was this one old guy that always called upon to do the Thanksgiving address. It took about upwards of an hour. He was very thankful. And he would even think he had this old hand pump outside his barn, and he talked at length about it. He was so thankful. But that is how we begin. And what that does is it puts our existence and our minds, our spirits, everything about us in a good place. But sometimes you might go to a meeting, you're in a bad mood. But this puts us in a good mood. This is a beautiful time, beautiful place to be. And so, just to start off about our discussion today, in Anchiota, my grandfather started a little museum called back then it's called the Six Nations Indian Museum. We're now called the Six Nations Iroquois Cultural Center. But that was started in 1954. And we've been running it as a family for 3 generations. And I was just there today. We're open during the summer and we close after Labor Day. But during those years and those decades, one of the common things that we always heard was that, well, the native people, they didn't really live in the Adirondacks year round. They were just passing through. You hear all these things that, like, we weren't here. And like, there's all this evidence we have in our collection that we were here, all this archeological evidence. And it just never sat well with me. And I never agreed with it because I was raised here. The winters are harsh, they're cold, but I love it. The whole landscape changes. It's another beauty all of its own. It's cold, but you bundle up. The winters are long, and right around February is when I had enough. But I don't go to Florida, I stay here. This is my home. And so why wouldn't my ancestors feel the same way? It's so beautiful here. Just look out the window. Why wouldn't you want to leave? So anyways, it just never sat well with me. And I met Curt a number of years ago. We'll talk a little bit more about this next. But we decided, for numerous reasons, to write a book. Let the clicker go. Oops. Gotta turn it on. Yeah, it's still not working. No.
Something get removed.
Oh,
Oh, now I ruined everything.
No. We're back.
well, I could keep going anyway.
Here we
Well, among, Kurt and I met and when we decided to work on this project, there was another project earlier on we worked on. And there's a concept among the Haudenosaunee, and we call it the Swenta, or two-row, where there's a wampum belt that was made many centuries ago as an agreement or like a treaty between the Haudenosaunee people, also known as the Iroquois. And it began with the Dutch, later the English, the French, and ultimately the Americans. And right behind that black bar, there's an image of that two-row. Oh, there's one right there. And if you notice, there's two rows of purple wampum beads going parallel. And there's what they call the caswenta, or the two-row. And the symbolism behind it is fairly simple. In one row represents the Haudenosaunee, or the Six Nations people, in our canoe, paddling down the river of life. Everything about us, our language, our political structure, everything is contained within that canoe, everything about us going down that river of life. And the next line represents the European, the Dutch, the English, French, and American in their ship. Everything about them is contained within that ship. Their language, their laws, their customs, their beliefs, their ways are within that ship, going down that same river of life. And if you notice, those two never interfere. They're parallel. They never cross the other's path. You never try to steer the other boat, but instead, between them, you see the white lines. That represents peace and friendship. We've held on to that belief for centuries, and that's how we look at each other, like we're friends. We're different, but we're paddling down that same river of life in friendship. And Kurt and I, we approached that concept. Me as an artist, as a Mohawk. He, as he puts it, a nerdy scientist. And the first project we worked on was resulted in this. And I'll just talk about it really briefly. This was a program or a project with the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And their idea is, how do you connect the arts with science to communicate the issues of Lake Champlain in terms of water pollution and so on and so forth. First thing I thought of was a young Native woman holding water. And what the idea is that what we touch as humans in our lifetime, or what we discard, especially into the water, it goes somewhere else. And I remember as a little boy, there's a little brook behind our house. And as a little kid, you know, you throw sticks in there and you watch it float like a little boat. And I was doing that, throwing these sticks. And my dad, he looked down at me and he says, you know, that's going to end up in the ocean someday. And it was profound. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, this brook empties into the Saranac River, ultimately the Lake Champlain, down the Richelieu to the St. Lawrence to the ocean. Wow, that always stuck with me. And so right away I had an idea, like here in the mountains, the water goes ultimately sometimes the St. Lawrence or Lake Champlain Basin. And so I met Curt, and he was the scientist involved, and we had a lot of discussions about what do we do as humans that ends up in the lake. And he rattled off all the pollutants, and I says, what do those pollutants and the algae look like? He sent me files and pictures, and so I did this painting. And this was a co-worker of mine at the time, and I was reluctant to ask, but I noticed that she was always taking selfies. She was young girl. And so I asked her, would you model for me? Sure. So she did. And she's a real nice young woman, and but that's her. But all around her is the foliage and the things in the trees, the forest. And also, when you look closely, each dab of paint, it's like a mosaic, has a different design in it. And also included hidden in these, the plant life, are the different types of algae. And if you can see here, there's the algae and there's other chemical, molecular structures up there. And those are the things that we can't see. Just like when you look at this painting, you don't see it like that. And so like in the natural world, those pollutants that we put into the water, we might not see it, but it ends up somewhere else. And so when the idea of this book, or the concept that no natives lived in the Adirondacks, Curt and I decided to write a book about it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Curt, the nerdy scientist.
So, drag that guy down there, and if we could forward to one side. Timekeeper here, kid, a little. So, thanks everybody for coming. It's just a real honor and a pleasure to work with Dave on this. I'll do the nerdy stuff with you for about 15 minutes. And first thing, as a scientist, I want to collect some data. Could we have a show of hands of who in the room has ever heard of this claim that indigenous people never lived in the Adirondacks? Okay, yeah. If you go outside the park, people are astonished that people would even say that. Even in Plattsburgh, folks have never heard of it, but it's something in the culture here that so many of us learned. And what I'd like to do is deconstruct that with you, show you even without nerdy data, just thinking carefully about it shows you how unrealistic it would be. So I'll start out just by saying that Dave and I have been working on this topic together for a long time, and we have family roots that go way back too, but we really got most involved about maybe almost 10 years ago. My parents were visiting. We went to the museum, and there in the corner on the floor of the Six Nations Iroquois Cultural Center was a dugout canoe. My father was interested in it and talked to Dave's father and asked, how old is that? And his father said, well, we don't really know. We don't have the resources to have carbon-14 dating done on it. So my father turned to me and said, you have a research grant, carbon-14, why don't you date it? So I said, oh, okay. And so then Dave's father turned to him and said, Dave, why don't you help Curt sample the canoe? And he said, oh, okay. And so there we are, sampling a little drill core of wood from the center of that canoe. So we had it dated. It came out just a couple of centuries old, which was way less than we had expected and actually kind of hoped. You know, we wanted it to be an ancient dinosaur or something like that. But it was still nice to know. There's another reason why it's important to know the age. If it's really old, you can be sure indigenous people made it. Whereas if it was younger, it might have been anybody that did it. So I'll show you the result of the follow-up research we did. We ended up eventually studying every dugout canoe that we could find out about from lakes in the Adirondacks. And next picture, please, is this. And that photo was taken in the room right above us. This is a gigantic monster from Twin Ponds, about halfway between Paul Smith's and Malone. There was a dredge operation going on by the former owner of this place. And this came up in a dredge, 18 feet long. Incredible. And there was another one as well, and brought in and stored here. And we're now trying to find out where it is. But we did have it dated, and it's about 500 years old. And we can also tell its indigenous origin, not only by the age, but also because if you look at the color, that means it's charred black. That was one of the techniques. You burn the wood and then chip away with stone tools. There's no sharp cut marks or anything on it. The thing was massive. It's basically about as long as that window right there. So something like this helps you challenge the whole idea of people not being here, right? if you're just passing through the mountains, rushing to get to somewhere else, why would you stop at Twin Ponds and spend weeks burning and hacking this thing so you could cross the puny little pond that you could have walked around in 20 minutes? It's too big to use on the outlet stream. That's just a little brook. So it wasn't something that was used to get to Twin Ponds. It was to be used on Twin Ponds, and it would be used over and over again. So here's one example of archaeological evidence for people being here repeatedly and or for long time periods. But next, let's review the main arguments you would get from somebody who would claim that indigenous people didn't live here, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the rationales, why can't they? Well, it's because what? I think if you just click the mouse sideways, it should do it, should advance it. We can advance one. I think just a regular old click. Yeah, okay, too brutal, too tough for indigenous people. Next, too hard to grow crops here. So how could they survive up here without their crops? Next, there was nothing here for them. So why would they even come? And next, and now that bar is going to get in the way. They were only passing through. So yes, they were here, but they didn't spend any time. So we're going to deconstruct 4 of those with logic and data. But I also want to point out that not only are they wrong, it can be upsetting, of course, right, to have had your culture lose the land to people who then deny that you even had it in the first place. And there was a practical reason for this kind of logic that dates back to the American Revolution. Next, and it's that because indigenous people were not here, the land was there for the taking. It was actually officially declared uninhabited at the end of the revolution, so the state could take the land and give it to revolutionary veterans. So let's go on with this. We'll go step by step here. Next. Okay, climate's too brutal. Okay, don't indigenous people live all the way up in the Arctic? If they can live up there and everywhere in between, why couldn't they live here in the Adirondacks? Okay. Next. No good for crops. Okay. I've heard this said by people who I know have either driven past or visited the great Adirondack corn maze in Gabriel's near Paul Smith's. Right? You can grow crops in the Adirondacks. I can prove it with a photo. That's crops. That's corn. That's St. Regis Mountain, right there at Paul Smith's. Right. The other thing is the issue is moot anyway, because indigenous people didn't even do crops for most of their history. The same with everybody, right? And when they finally did it in the most recent centuries, they had special strains of the crops that could handle this climate and these soils anyway. So it's not a true statement. Next. Nothing here for them. Well, what do you need to live with that lifestyle? Well, over on the left, you have materials for building homes, the bark and the wood and all that stuff. To the right, indigenous people invented maple syrup, right? Down here, they invented snowshoes too, didn't they? And you could be hunting for animals all year round, including in the winter. And on the lower left, you have fish in the streams and the lakes all year round. All you have to do to get fresh food in the middle of winter here, drill a hole in the ice, chop it with a sharp tool, and you can catch fish. So there's everything you need. Why in the world then wouldn't people be here? In fact, the burden of proof to say that they weren't here is to show why they wouldn't be here. If they lived everywhere else, like including New England and north of here in similar habitats, why wouldn't they be here? It just does not make sense. Next. Okay, so this only passing through thing can be pretty well demolished by the dugouts. Also on the left, we have some beautiful clay pot, and that's Dave's grandfather, Ray Kanietakeron Fadden. Some of you may have met him before, and he founded the museum. And some years ago, a hunter a deer hunter came across a rock shelter on Silver Lake Mountain and looked inside and found this amazing gigantic pot. And Ray acquired it for the museum, and it's now in the museum if you'd like to see it. But imagine this, right? If people are only passing through to get through the Adirondacks to some other place, would they carry a gigantic, fragile, heavy clay pot with them? Probably not, right? And so actually, also the cultures in which this kind of pottery was made tended to have the work done by women. So it's not just a bunch of, hunting bros rushing through the woods going after stuff. This is a family scene as well at the rock shelter. So again, these kinds of items found all over the region show you that people were here for extended periods. Next. So there hasn't been that much field archaeology done here. There is one very active archaeologist at SUNY Potsdam. Tim Messner has been doing this for more than 10 years. Now there's a new archaeologist at SUNY Potsdam starting to work on the area. There are lots of reasons why there isn't more stuff, partly just because the land is covered with trees and it's hard to find this stuff. But here's an excavation that Tim invited us to with his students down at Long Lake in someone's yard. And when we showed up, Carrie and I, he showed us this square pit in the ground, and on the bottom were these rocks, these little fist-sized cobbles. And he was all excited. So I said, well, it looks like a pile of rocks there. And he said, oh, it's FCR. He had to explain to us that FCR means firecracked rock. Oh, okay. Yeah, now I see it. Yeah, they're charred on the outside. There's charcoal and they're rusty. Have you seen that in your campfires and stuff? It gets all rusty, broken up. He said it's a hearth. Now, to me, a hearth is a fireplace, kettle boiling and stuff. This is how people cooked in the past before they had the metal pots and things like that. You heat the rocks till they're red hot in the fire. Then you have a container, could be an animal hide, even the stomach of an animal, or a basket that's waterproof. You put in your stew, and then you pick up the rocks, the red hot rocks with sticks, and drop them in, and they boil the water instantly. And you cook that way. And so this was enough piles of rocks to cook a large meal for somebody on Long Lake. So that's pretty neat. And so I asked him, like, how old is this thing? And he said, we don't know. We don't have the funding to get carbon-14 dates. So Gary looked at me, and next shot, we had it done. 1,000 years old. We could date the charcoal in there. So that means people were at Long Lake cooking a nice meal with each other when the Vikings were settling Greenland. All right. Next. So I'll take you a little farther back than that too. How far back do these kinds of things happen? So if you look at stone artifacts, especially flint or chert is the name of the rock, these are stone tools that you can find all over the park. And it's from a kind of a rock that is not from here. It had to be brought by people, and it's used for making projectile points, arrowheads, spear points, things like that. And so if you're an archaeological specialist, you can recognize the age by the style of the projectile point, just like we could do with a car, tell when the car was made, right? So archaeological evidence looks at something like this from down near the Fulton chain of lakes, where a lot of these have been found. And these are 5,000 years old. That's the age of the Egyptian pyramids. And you can find that time period worth of items all over the park. Next, including Tupper Lake. Next, the oldest stone tools we know of are projectile points with a characteristic groove on the bottom. It's called a flute, a fluted point. It's a groove that was used to help attach it to the shaft of the projectile. These were made about 10 to 12, 13,000 years ago. That style from Tupper Lake is a 12,000-year-old Neponset type of projectile point. So it was used for probably hunting caribou, right, at the time near the close of the last ice age. So this goes all the way back for whenever people could be here, right? And there are several of these found through the park. Next. So one of the little side projects that Dave and I have been doing is every time we hear of something being found or we find it ourselves, we put a little dot on a map. And so here's a map of the whole Adirondacks, and there's Lake Champlain and St. Lawrence, and every red dot is a place where something was found. Thousands of years old, whatever. So that is the Adirondacks, and it's the uplands, and there are more than 36 sites with multiple stuff all over it, including even little flakes. If next time you're out camping or canoeing, look at one of the deep sea campsites. The reason those are there is because they're beautiful and convenient, and that's where people would have camped through the ages, right? And you look through all the pine needles and you'll find little flakes of chert like that one there on Lower Saranac Lake. Next. So I'll start wrapping this up, but I want to show you that this reawakening of awareness, which Dave's family has been talking about for generations, is spreading through our culture now in our society, and you're all part of this message too. And we're doing it at Paul Smith's College as well, looking at the story where we are. So here's a picture of this beautiful point on Lower St. Regis Lake. This is campus property, and the campus is right over there. And we found stone tools right on our point, to our point, picnic point, we call it. Thousands of years old things. In addition to that, this fits the research that I do with my students at the college. Next, we take sediment cores from lakes around here and carbon-14 date them and reconstruct ancient environments. And we've done that on Lower St. Regis Lake. So this is a sediment core that we pulled up, drilled through the ice down to the bottom of the lake. Here's a tube of mud that we pushed down into the sediment until it stopped at the deposits left by the last ice age. And so this sediment here in the tube here is gray because that's silt from the ice sheet. And we carbon dated the surface of it where the lake formed, and it's 13,000 years old. Now, if you remember that number, 13,000, match that up with the stone tools, 12 to 13,000. That means people were here as soon as people could be here. After the ice. Next. So I'm going to leave you this picture. This is a photo I took 13,000 years ago at Paul Smith's College. And here's some of the wildlife. We know actually for a fact that muskox were here because there was a vertebra found in Elizabethtown in a gravel pit that David Franzi at SUNY Plattsburgh analyzed. So those are Arctic animals, right? So this is about 13,000 years ago. We can deduce that there were caribou for sure because they were everywhere in New York State, and probably maybe even mastodons and mammoths. But anyway, there are plenty of animals to hunt, but I especially want you to look at the vegetation. Where's the forest? There isn't any. It looks like this amazing part of the road here, just around the corner. When you go around and there's that beautiful flat open area with the mountains behind it, it's like tundra and boreal habitats, right? It's grasses and mosses and a few places with scrubby spruces and firs, and the rest is basically open like that. Now, if we put all of this together, what do we conclude? People were there before the forest was there. This is the first Adirondack landscape that the first Adirondackers lived on. And yet we look at this place and say, this beautiful forested landscape and say, this is a habitat where people don't belong. Indigenous people were never here. It was too tough for them. It's the other way around. The forest is the newcomer. The people have been here longer than the trees, which reminds me of a song. The one John Denver made famous, Country Roads. Life is old there, older than the trees. Here in the Adirondacks, it's true. I'll leave it to that and hand it back over to Dave.
This was a real fun project, and again, it's been over 10 years and we're working together on various things, and through that time, we became pretty good friends. And I just want to go back, just talk a little bit my own experiences at the museum. As a little kid growing up there, I was really shy, and I just sat there and listened. and I listened a lot, and I learned stories and traditions, and I didn't realize it, but the whole time he was teaching me. And it was because I was just sitting there listening, kept my ears open. And it wasn't until I was about 17 or 18 years old, I would never forget the day. There's people at the museum and they always come to hear him talk and tell stories, and he would use a beaded pictographic record belt to tell legends and stories, and he'd set up some benches and people were drawn to that. And I was too. I just loved it. And I'll never forget the day. There was 2 or 3 families sitting around waiting for a story. And he looked over to me and he says, "Why don't you tell a story?" I wanted to run away because I was so, I was shy. And he just said, "I just don't feel good today." And, he's my grandpa, so I listened. And I says, "Well, I'll do it, but you have to leave the room," because he made me nervous. He was the master storyteller after all. So he left the room and I proceeded to tell the beaded record out story, and it was awful. My voice was quivering, my hand was shaking, I was nervous. But as I was telling it, I realized I knew it. It was up here. And about halfway through, I could smell his pipe. He used to smoke a pipe. So I knew he was within earshot of me, listening. And that made me more nervous. But I survived. I finished the story. I lived. I'm still here. And after I finished the story, he walked around the corner and came up to me and patted me on the shoulder. And that was the beginning. And so I got a little better after that. And some say I'm getting pretty good now. But didn't do it a lot. But all those years, listening to my grandfather, visiting people, that was one of the common themes. He said, "Oh, it's too cold," all those excuses. And then he would point out all the artifacts in our collection that were found by accident. Like that pottery bowl, Hunter just stumbled on it. And we have pottery shards from the base of St. Regis Mountain, and Paul Smith's. This guy, I think his name is Jim Beckford, was just hiking through, and there was these stones, and he put his hand in this little area, cave, and he pulled the stuff out, and it was pottery shards, a lot of it. And that's in our collection. In recent years, actually this year, Curt met a guy, I don't know if he was a neighbor, right in Saranac Lake, when he was about in the 1980s. He was young, riding his bike, and kids skid around in their bikes and in the dirt, in the sand. It was like a sand pit. And he was kicking up some dirt, and something caught his eye, and he found this projectile point right there in Saranac Lake. Threw it in his pocket, and he put it in a box, and he kept it for all those years. And then he heard about our project and our book. I don't know if he heard us speak, but he felt obligated to gift it to us, and that's now in our collection. Another guy 2 years ago, older gentleman, was just hiking up Dewey Mountain, also in Saranac Lake, and he was just randomly walking along, and something caught his eye. Again, side of the trail, bent down, and it was another projectile point. Beautiful. And he gifted that to us. And we have others that were gifted to us, and all of them were found by accident. My dad, years ago, went to a conference, I believe it was at SUNY Plattsburgh. There was an archaeologist from Vermont, UVM, and he was doing a presentation about Indigenous folks in his work. And he threw up this map on the screen, and we have Vermont, Lake Champlain, and New York State, and the Adirondacks. And on the Vermont side, he had all those dots, just like the map Curt just showed, of all the sites where they found villages, evidence of habitation in the Green Mountains of Vermont, all over the place. And especially, which is normal, is concentrated near water, rivers and ponds and lakes. You need water, not only to drink and to live, but also transportation. And they're concentrated all along the shores of Lake Champlain, all the way down. Then on the New York side, there was these dots all along the shores of Lake Champlain, but very few in the Adirondacks. And my father is wondering why is that? And he asked him a question, and he pointed out the obvious. How come there's more in Vermont than there is in the Adirondacks? And the Green Mountains are very similar to the Adirondacks in terms, the terrain is very similar. And I often joke Well, I don't do this too often, but we're all from the Adirondacks. I hope nobody's from Vermont. The best thing about the Green Mountains is the view of the Adirondacks. But anyways, I don't say that in Vermont very often. But that professor said, to answer my dad's question, he says, well, we just study our own backyard. Rather than take the ferry across with all their equipment and their students, and you have to find housing in the Adirondacks. So they study their own backyard. And so logic thinking, you think there'd be very similar sites in the Adirondacks. It just hasn't been a concentrated effort to look. And again, all that stuff is found by accident. And we have another few points in Tupper Lake, and there was this fisherman. And he was an amateur archaeologist. He was always fishing. He used to live in North Carolina. He lives in Moores, New York. He lived in Tupper Lake. And he would go around the whole lake, and he found a spot where the wind was just right. It kept the bugs away. And he goes, I bet there's a native camp here or a site. So he just pulled his boat up, went up there, didn't take long, just did a few scratches in the dirt, and he started coming up with projectile points. And it just was, you just use your head. Where would you want to stay? And he found a lot there. And Tim Messner, who did a dig on that site. And a number of years ago, there was a guy who was talking about the mountains, and he made a comment that kind of stuck with me. And he says, Native people never hiked the high peaks for fun. And I looked at him, and he says, why would you say that? Of course they did. They probably ran up those mountains. They were so fit back then. Those mountains, if you're a young man, young woman, and you're got all this energy, and you look at that beautiful mountain right there, I wonder what it looks like at the top. Of course you're gonna go. Tim Messner was hiking I can't remember what peak, but one of the high peaks, and he was climbing down about part way, and he found a spot where it was leveled off, and he was taking a break right along the trail. And he's got a trained eye, and he's just looking around, and he started picking up these pieces of chert. It was a little work area thousands of years ago where they were chipping flint to make projectile points. There was evidence of humans 1,000 years ago up in the high peaks crafting points. Of course we were here. So all of these little bits of information, this evidence is starting to accumulate. It's starting to paint a different story, a different picture. Now, by the time Europeans got here to these mountains, there were no people here. This was after the American Revolution. And the American Revolution in years prior was a very hard time for us as Umkwahua or Iroquois people. All humans fight around the world. Wars, even now, just turn on the news. People fight. That's just the human existence. We fought as well. We fought neighbors. But what I always learned is that when we fought, it was short. They were more like skirmishes, and I've even heard it referred to as a very rough sport. Because women played a role in declaring war. The women control the food. And so if you get a bunch of young guys and they want to go off to fight, you're going to need rations, you're going to need food to eat. And if they supported what you were doing, the women would give you food to help. But if they didn't agree with it, they keep the food hidden. And so if you're on your way, you have to hunt, you have to fish, and feed yourself. And hopefully by then you'll change your mind and come home. But our battles were short-lived. And in fact, our confederation, with the 5 original nations and later 6, is called the Guyana Let Go. And in English, it's the loose translation is the Great Law of Peace. All effort is put towards keeping peace, because we all know what war does. People die. And it's how do we avoid that? When Europeans arrived, they brought with them their wars, and they wanted control of the land, of the water, the highways. And the French, when they were coming down Lake Champlain, Samuel D. Champlain, In fact, he had some Algonquins, Montagnais with him, and they wanted to conquer the Six Nations so that they could control the water and the flow of the beaver pelt, because that was the commodity of the day. Everyone in Europe back in those days had to have a felt hat. And so that was, it was very valuable. It was a part of the economy. So whoever controlled the water, just like now, whoever controls the flow of oil, you make the money. So the French came and they wanted to destroy the Haudenosaunee people. In the first encounter with Champlain, he lifted up his gun, he fired a shot, and he killed 3 Mohawk chiefs right from the beginning. Then he went home to Quebec. His second trip, by then we got guns. I believe it was the Dutch. We fought back and he was brought home in a basket. He was wounded. And because of that first encounter, that's why right now we're speaking English, because we sided with the British and we pushed them back. And then the British in the colonies started to fight among themselves, the American Revolution. And the Haudenosaunee people originally wanted to stay out of it. And we looked at it like father and son fighting. And as a council, they couldn't decide who to side with. And so symbolically, they say they put the council fire out and they said, go fight with who you wish. So for us, it was a civil war. Mohawks sided with the British. Oneidas and Tuscaroras sided with the colonies, the Americans. And blood was shed between our nations. And then after that war ended, as the new United States was negotiating with Great Britain, what they were negotiating was our land. And by then, our numbers were depleted. Not only war, but disease took its toll. And we were pushed out, not only out of the Mohawk Valley in central New York. In fact, there was George Washington, that first president. The Haudenosaunee people would refer to him as town destroyer. It's not a good thing, because he sent an army across Haudenosaunee territory, a scorched earth policy to break the back, the Iroquois. And how you do that is you destroy their homes, you destroy their buildings, their structures, and their food. They cut down orchards, trees, they burned everything, the crops. They left a record of how much they destroyed. It was like 1 million bushels of corn, and that was for the coming winter. Every home, every structure was burned to the ground. It took an army to do this. It took a long time. And the survivors fled, and a lot of them starved to death. Thousands starved, just they had no food. And they went to Fort Niagara for refuge, and some starved there. And so numbers are really down. And after the War of 1812, they say, among all the Haudenosaunee, or 6 nations, the population was as low as under 10,000 left. We were almost wiped out. The majority of it was disease. We had no immunity. And that was used as a weapon as well. It was actually a minister. He would take blankets off of bodies, people sick with smallpox, and gift it to the indigenous people, knowing they would get sick and possibly die. They did that here, they did that all the way across the country. It was germ warfare. So our numbers were really down. And I just learned a story from my mother. She told me this, that her grandmother told her when she was little, that they remember a time when we lived in the Mohawk Valley, and that the men were off hunting. And when they got back, their families, their wives, their children, their grandparents were all gone, disappeared. No idea where they went, just gone. They couldn't find them for 1 whole year. They were missing their families, and they found them in a place called Kanietakeron, and that's near Montreal, just south of Montreal. There's a Mohawk community there. And that's where they met their families again. They reunited, and from there, they ended up at Akwesasne, on what we call Gavano, Cornwall Island, on the St. Lawrence, and there was a community established. So by then, these mountains were void of people. It wasn't by choice. We were forced out in disease, all these horrible things. the treaties, these land sales were stolen land, taken from us. The United States, when it began, was poor, was broke, because these wars, as you know now, are very expensive. Cost a lot of money, so they had their independence, but they were broke. And how you make money is through land. And if there's people on that land, you eliminate them or displace them, and they make their money. So after we lost these vast tracts of land over that time, we were scattered. Ganawage, Akwesasne, Kanietakeron, all in Ontario, Waka, 6 nations out near Toronto. The Oneidas were left with 32 acres, and they even sided with the Americans. Onondaga is near Syracuse. There's no Cayugas, they don't have any land. The Senecas are near Buffalo, they have a few reservations, and there's Senecas in Cayugas that live in Oklahoma. There's Oneidas that live in Wisconsin. But this whole state was ours. This was our home. And over those years, we were displaced. But they remind us of these stories. Remember the time when this was our home. And we have legends and stories about these mountains, about homes being here. So there's oral tradition and all these things about our memory. And we're starting to talk to the elders that still speak the language to remember the names of these mountains. And even the word Adirondack, it is a Mohawk word, but we didn't coin it for these mountains, somebody else. And Adirondack is a loose pronunciation of Adirondacks, and that means barkeeper or porcupine. Somebody else put that name, but in our language, what we call these mountains is Kanietakeron, and that in one translation it means tall hills. But I asked my mother, and she's a fluent speaker. I said, "What does Kanietakeron mean?" And she's thought about it, and she says, "Well, the root of the word is Anunta, and that means milk." I said, "Why do they call it that?" And she kind of looked at me funny, and she says, "Well, breasts." And that's, I mean, it makes sense. And, you know, you look at those, so I could see that from a distance, I guess. But that's the name of these mountains. So we have a long history. So we're working on getting the language attached to the mountains, to the rivers and the landscape. In recent years, there's been a movement, the one they call land back, where Indigenous people are looking to reacquire the land that was stolen from us. We were tricked, some cases, or outright stolen. A lot of the treaties they made, or most of them, if not all of them, were broken. We hold on to those treaties because our word is our honor. We hold on to that, like that 2-row. We still believe in that. And all the agreements we made with the Americans, we still hold on to that. And according to the United States' own law, they broke their own law when they would acquire Indigenous land. Because any land transfer that occurs has to be approved by Congress. It never was. So in my book, that's illegal. And so there's land claims that have been in court. And my grandfather always told me, no or Indigenous person will ever win in a white man's court. It just won't happen. He proved to be true. Because the Oneidas had a court case called the Sheriff versus Oneida. And they were looking to get land, they were buying land back, but they wanted to be sovereign, like tax-free. And so the court case went, and they kept winning, kept proving, well, you know, this is illegal. And the government would appeal and go to a higher court, went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And it was then, and it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who wrote the opinion, and she threw it out. Even though the Oneidas were winning, she said, "You waited too long. You're gonna do undue harm to the American citizen, even though we lost our land through force." So he was right, my grandfather. So how do we get our land back? In recent years, I met some really nice folks. In 2020, we became a not-for-profit organization. And their initial goal was just simple improvements to the building and to the museum, and maybe get a salary and grants and things like that. A lot of work. But like any good little idea, it starts to grow. It's like a seed. And before you know it, you have this giant tree. That's our project. And so it started to grow. And in 2022, land came up for sale just to the west of us, over 300 acres. And I met this lady at the museum in 2021. And I asked, what do you do? Her name was Mary Cole. She goes, oh, I work for the Adirondack Land Trust. Oh, what do you do? We buy land for conservation. Oh, I know where there's some land for sale. And before I knew it, we were having meetings and we raised the funds and we purchased that property. And that became put under the not-for-profit. And then 2 years ago, I met another nice lady. Boy, a lot of nice ladies come to our museum. She walked through the door, and her name was Peg Olson. And she worked for the Nature Conservancy. I said, oh, what do you guys do? We buy land for conservation. And at that time, the land to our east, over 600 acres, was up for sale. And my fear is that we get some developer that would clear cut it and put up these houses and oh. And she says, don't worry about it. We're gonna get it. It was valued at 1.1 million because it had buildings and cabins on it. Beautiful, nice spot. They raised the funds in March 9th of 2026, this spring. Signed the document. They transferred ownership to our not-for-profit. So now we have over 900 acres of land that's come back under Haudenosaunee care. And we know how to take care of land. So you don't have to worry about that. So we got over 900 acres, and under that land, we're placing what you would call a conservation easement. Well, we're doing that a little different. We're calling it a caretaking covenant. And we're approaching this easement similar to how Curt and I approached this book. And we used the 2-row as a model. On this document, on one side or one row, is the Adirondack Land Trust and the Nature Conservancy and their language, in their words about how you take care of the land, the rules of the land. On the other side of the page, our words, within the shown, how we look at the earth in our language, how we take care of it. So those 2 rows are written in our own way to take care of the land that we all love. And so this document will be the first of its kind in New York State, if not the country. And so with the work that we're doing, we're putting a path down for others to follow. If there's any people in Maine, New Hampshire, Ohio, the Lakotas, Nebraska, California, all over, they could use this as a model how we can reacquire some of our land. We don't need all of it. There's a lot to share. So just a little bit at a time, and we'll take care of it and protect it forever. And with that, I will open up questions. You folks have any questions?
Both of you at our recollection meeting for many years. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. But I also was a camper at Moss Lake Camp, which was taken over by your people. And ultimately, an arrangement with the state was made whereby you received more land. And the state got back the Moss Lake area to make a private campground or a state campground, which is lovely. I'm happy that everything happened the way it did, because this was originally part of your, and I'm just delighted to hear you once more. I haven't heard you in several years since you didn't come to Wilmington. And so, thank you so much for this evening.
You're welcome. I was only 3 when that happened, so don't look at me. think it was 1973. But, that's one way to do it on the island, but there's other ways, and if I follow, the other Iroquois people follow the Guyana Lagoa by peace as a premise, there's a way. And, even like the concept, ownership of land is different. Like when they arrived, the Europeans arrived, they had private property, you put up a little fence, that was foreign to us. And, I heard an elder once say, you can't own that. You can't put it in your pocket. You can't put it in a bank. It's like saying, this is my air. You can't breathe it, or that water, that's mine. It's impossible. And so we're here for a short time. And it's our job and our responsibility to take care of it, not only for us, but in our philosophy is always 7 generations ahead. What we do to this land in our lives today, we keep in the forefront of our minds those little babies that aren't even here yet. And so with that in mind, I keep that in mind with the land that we just got. And it's really great to know that those young faces someday will be able to roam the woods like I do.
Actually, I just wanted to say that Joe grew up in the area and the school went to Six Nations to hear your father many times.
David, I understand that there are plans to build a new museum and to relocate the existing museum that you have in Ontario into that new building on the property that you acquired. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, like I said, when we came in not-for-profit in 2020, it was during the pandemic. And believe it or not, I actually enjoyed the pandemic because I didn't have to go to work all summer. Because everything was closed and I'm at that museum every summer. And so that summer I went hiking, canoeing, camping, and I did a lot of artwork but it was during that time that as a family, we started to think about the condition of the building. It's old. Right now it's 72 years old and there's falling apart some places. You make little patches and repairs here and there. And what's really damaging to the collection are those hot, humid days. It's really bad for anything organic, leather, feathers, cardboard, all of it. If you've ever been there, which you have, it takes your breath away if it's your first time, because it's just full of stuff. Even the floor is painted different Iroquois motifs and design all the way up to the peak of the ceiling. But for all those years, there was no climate control. And so that was our initial idea, was maybe we can get an air conditioner in here and make a little bit of improvements for the collection. But it's that idea started to go, and then the land came up and we got the land. And so we surveyed off 20 acres off the 300 to develop for a new museum. And we're actually going to take the old building, lift it up, and bring it down the road to the new site. I don't know how they're going to do this yet. I don't know if I'm going to walk, but they're going to bring it to the new site and build around it. And so that the old building is now in itself, because even the floors, the ceiling, everything was by my grandfather. And all around the building, in the interior of this new building, will be modern exhibits, climate control, the whole facility. It is reflecting Haudenosaunee philosophy about taking care of the earth. We're going to utilize every green technology available to not harm the earth anymore. Even the building technique, they call it a passive building standard. And what that means is really thick walls loaded with insulation. So you don't need a lot of energy to heat and cool it. And in fact, it reduces your energy needs by up to 80%. It's expensive, but that's the way to do it. Utilize solar and all the technologies that we can. Not only to protect the collection, but it reflects our philosophies towards the earth and that 7th generation ahead. But all around the old building will be all new exhibits that will be a clear narrative of our history, from our creation story all the way up to contemporary times. Because when you go into that museum, if I'm not there to point things out, you don't know where to begin. You don't know where to end, it's just chock full of stuff. So this way we'll have a clear story. But then I wanted to see my grandfather's work, enter the old building to see all of the work that he did. And then you'll exit into an art gallery to see my stuff. Well, we're in the fundraising stage. We raised enough money to put a road in. And I have a couple good leads with other foundations and individuals that look pretty promising.
Yeah, hey Jade. Been to your museum, took a homeschooling group there 2 years ago and definitely awesome area up there. I just was curious, I don't know all of the things that you do, but with your expansion and all of the ideas that you seem to be blossoming, are there any ideas of having like self-sufficiency classes, food prep, and those types of ways to share for others to be able to learn?
Good question. That's exactly what we're gonna do. With the 600 acres we got, they have cabins. And those cabins they're all identical. There's 5 of them that are 54 feet long, and 20 feet wide, decent size. And well built, well insulated. The only thing they don't have is electricity or running water. But they do have a water source in each of the 5. And they have wood stoves. Well, we would like to get solar and all the efficiency to get some power. And some of the cabins will serve as a place for kids to stay, camps. And we're trying to do it this year, but I think we're not ready. There's a guy, a Tuscarora guy I know, who works at SUNY ESF. And he has what they call the Native Earth camp. And they bring Six Nations kids and they go canoeing and camping all over the Adirondacks. But they never have a home. They always find that it's hard work to find a place. Now they have a home in our place. And I met with them and they checked out the cabins, and so we're going to be using that. And I'm working with another Mohawk woman who works with kids through different programs on the reservation to bring them to the mountains, to go hiking, go canoeing, have a place to stay for free. And to learn those skills that you mentioned. We do have programs on the reservation, simple, basic shelter, fire, water, food, things like that, that I learned as a kid. And I just want to give those young kids, not only native kids, but non-native as well, to experience the forest and to develop an appreciation for it so that they'll take care of it when they're adults. And I'm working with another lady who works with the local school districts where they do winter camping. I'm not sure if I'm ready for winter camping, but I did it in my youth. But she's going to bring kids from the local school districts to come onto the property. Then I'm working with the Akwesasne Seed Hub, and they're doing farming techniques, growing traditional foods, learning how to preserve it for winter, and we distribute it to families that need on the reservation. And we have a network with Hudson Valley and also New England. It's about food sovereignty. And so I'm working with them, and there's just all these organizations coming out of the woodwork, and they want to help and partner. So it's all good stuff. It's really exciting.
Thank you.
Is there a driveway already going in? I drove down the road and I see a gravel driveway.
Yep.
And your new property is already being developed.
This June, we had enough money. Well, when this first started, I started looking for money right away, but I never built anything. I didn't know about APA, and you need an engineer, you need that stuff to protect the water and the land. But that took over 1.5 years to get the plans ready, and I raised enough money to pay the engineer. That was a lot. And then I had an architect who's working for free, and giving up her time. And so we raised enough funds to put the road in and to clear the site. And so we're still raising funds to actually build the facility. It might take a number of years, unless you know a couple billionaires to send them my way. In fact, we had a late July, it was July 22nd through 24th, working with a young Mohawk girl who graduated from Paul Smith College. Really smart girl. And she led a bioblitz on the property. And what that is they gather experts in the field and they scatter throughout the property to identify the plant life, trees, animal habitations, everything. And they had, I think, close to 50 folks just scattered throughout the property for 3 days. And they have these apps, and I don't know how it works, where you can put a GPS, the site on the property and then create a map. And so with that information, and she has over 650 data points, meaning 600 different plants and animals, and there's a lot, and where they are. And so I'm working with other folks from the reservation to identify the medicinal plants, food plants, other plants that are more sensitive to avoid. And they'll put a trail through it. And so we're gonna develop a trail system on that property that will protect the land and the plant life. And we'll put up lean-tos and things like that, so. You know, and this is for everyone, it's not just native people, it's for all of those who want to experience the woods. Another question?
Yeah, Dave, thanks very much. It's fabulous. You mentioned at the time of the Revolutionary War, through illness and land grabbing, people left, your people left, but your family's here. And your grandfather was here, and your great-grandfather. So can you just tell us a little bit about how your family, I guess, returned, if that's the right word,
Well, there's
to
been,
this place?
in some cases, native people never left. You know, we just kind of blended into the communities, and my grandfather's side, they're Scottish and Mohawk. And so on that side, they were able to acquire, it was 50 acres or 400 acres that came up for taxes. It was my great-grandfather purchased it and gifted my grandfather 50. And it was there he started a native youth camp, you know, back in the 1930s, before World War II. But in terms of indigenous people being in the Adirondacks, you could probably go to any town and find native people living there. You know, we don't walk around with our feathers in our hat. Not nowadays, anyway. It's funny because when you drive through a community, like native folks, we can always pick out who's native. Sometimes it's the way they walk, they have a certain swagger, and it's kind of a joke. But I know in Saranac Lake, there was a few native families. One, I'll tell you a quick story. I went to school in Saranac Lake, and I went to Bloomingdale School, it's an elementary school, then you go to Saranac Lake, Petrova, in 6th grade. And so I went to Petrova Middle School. And anyways, going to school, and all these kids got to meet, and it was a small school to a big school, so it was a little nerve-wracking. I remember this girl was really pretty. You know, I was this little geeky kid. And, but we became friends, and I had kind of had a real big crush on this girl for years, right into high school. And then I remember my mother, I'll never forget, we were washing dishes, and she looked at me and goes, you know, you have a cousin that goes to school in Saranac Lake. Sure enough, my crush became my cousin. Just my luck.
I have a question, as a historian for Wilmington. We have looked at the Essex County, I think it's 1885, Essex County, what was it, volume, history. And a section of Wilmington, on Wilmington, about halfway down the first paragraph, it says that one of the gentlemen who moved to town from Vermont, when he came to town, about 2 miles south of town, which would make it right around the Hungry Trout, that area, there were, he called it Indian wigwams, and that's the way they have it written in there. And this would be the early 1800s, very early 1800s. Do you know anything about that area?
Specifically, I don't know if you.
Like Dave said, there were people here a lot. There were also Wabanaki people here traveling a lot. There are diary accounts from Rainbow Lake from James Wardner, the hotelier there, who was good friends with Mitchell Sabattis, and Abenaki guide. And so people were always passing through, and sometimes had, you call them wigwams or portable homes. on the waterways around here, so it's possible they were migratory. With a traditional campground, they would come back to a lot with the Wabanaki people too. And there's also supposed to be something, Mary McKenzie, the Lake Placid historian, said there was supposed to be something on the plains of Abraham, but I've asked around at the Torrance farm and they've never found anything. So there's lots of rumors of it, which again suggests that there were absolutely people here all over, just keeping a low profile, basically.
Yeah, are there any other questions? Well, thank you very, very much. We very much appreciate it. You've been quite wonderful, and I understand that you have books over here of the First Adirondackers that you guys are willing to sign for people. So if you'd like to purchase a book and have it signed, it's going to be right over here. Thank you so much.